Communal violence in Xinjiang. Defend Chinese deformed workers' state for workers' political revolution. Early last July, a violent nationalist conflict erupted in Urumqi, the provincial capital of Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region in western China. It began on July 5th when hundreds of Uyghurs, a Turkic-speaking, traditionally Islamic people, went on a murderous rampage against their Han Chinese neighbors. Han mobs then retaliated in kind. The Chinese government now sets the number killed at 197, most of them Han Chinese, while some 1,600 were injured. To halt the inter-ethnic bloodletting, the government authorities utilized massive police force with 20,000 troops patrolling both Han and Uyghur neighborhoods. From the outset, the Beijing regime has claimed, without convincing evidence, that the riots in Urumqi were masterminded by the anti-Chinese nationalists of the World Uyghur Congress, WUC, an imperialist-sponsored group based mainly in the US and Germany. Needless to say, the WUC presents a completely different picture of what the Chinese government, from the Chinese government, of the events leading to the riots. It contends that on July 5th, a peaceful protest by Uyghurs, mainly university students, was set upon by the police, who opened fire on the demonstrators without any provocation. For its part, the Chinese government says that the repressive measures took were a response to, not the cause of the violence. We are quite distant from the situation, and each source, whether it's the Chinese government, the WUC, or the imperialist media, has its own motive in presenting what happened. What is clear is that, however the events on July 5th may have begun, they soon degenerated into communalist violence. Even the London Economists, 11 July 2009, a house organ for the Anglo-American financier, stated, quote, "The violence in Xinjiang was crude, racist stuff on both sides, with the Han Chinese suffering the brunt of it," end quote. The trigger for riots in Urumqi was an event that occurred thousands of miles away in the southeastern Chinese coastal province of Guangdong. In late June, Uyghur migrant workers living in a dormitory at a toy factory owned by Hong Kong capitalists were attacked by Han workers. At least 2 Uyghur workers were killed and scores injured. The attack, which lasted for hours, was apparently provoked by a false rumor circulated by a disgruntled former worker that 6 Uyghur men had raped 2 Han women. After news of what had happened reached Xinjiang, Uyghurs were enraged over the inaction by Chinese authorities and demanded a full government investigation. These complaints against the Chinese government, which seemed to be justified, in no way excuse the murderous rampage by Uyghurs in Xinjiang against their Han neighbors. Xinjiang, with its wealth of natural resources, especially large deposits of oil and natural gas, is of great strategic economic importance to China. The country's president, Hu Jintao, judged the communalist violence in Urumqi to be of such political importance and urgency that he cut short his participation in the G8 summit in Italy and returned to Beijing. What is the broad political significance of the national conflict between the Uyghurs and Han Chinese in Xinjiang? To answer that question, it is necessary to understand the class nature of the Chinese state and its relationship to world imperialism. The class character of the Chinese state. The 1949 Chinese Revolution marked the military victory of Mao Zedong's peasant-based army over Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang, destroyed capitalist landlord rule, and liberated the country from imperialist subjugation. The revolution brought enormous social gains to China's workers, peasants, and deeply oppressed women. However, the People's Republic of China, ruled by the Communist Party, CCP, emerged as and continues to be a bureaucratically deformed workers' state patterned on the former Soviet Union under J.V. Stalin. A parasitic, nationalistic, bureaucratic caste rests atop a collectivized economy. Like the Soviet Stalinist forebears, Mao and his successors, including the current regime, have reached the profoundly anti-Marxist notion that socialism could be built in a single country. Marxists define socialism as a classless, egalitarian society based on material abundance, which could be built only on the basis of international planning, crucially requiring the overthrow of capitalist rule in the advanced capitalist centers of North America, West Europe, and Japan. In practice, the Stalinist dogma of socialism in one country has meant accommodation to world imperialism and opposition to the perspective of international workers' revolution. As Trotskyists, we stand for the unconditional military defense of the Chinese bureaucratically deformed workers' state against imperialism and capitalist counter-revolution. In answer to the aspirations of the Chinese workers and rural toilers, and also to the national minorities like the Uyghurs, for democratic rights and a government that represents their needs and interests, we stand for a proletarian political revolution to oust the Stalinist bureaucracy and establish a government based on the elected workers and peasants' council that is committed to revolutionary proletarian internationalism. Past several decades, the Beijing Stalinist regime has utilized extensive market mechanisms in the economy while encouraging large-scale investment by Western and Japanese corporations and the offshore Chinese bourgeoisie in Taiwan and Hong Kong. A sizable class of capitalist entrepreneurs, many of them former government functionaries and the children of current functionaries, has also developed on the mainland. As a consequence, there is now a widely held belief across the entire political spectrum that once communist China has become capitalist or is rapidly and irreversibly doing so. That belief is false. The core of the Chinese economy continues to be based on collectivized property. In fact, the non-capitalist character of China has been clearly demonstrated during the current severe global economic downturn. To see this, one can compare the effects of the economic stimulus programs in the US and China. Despite the $800 billion stimulus package enacted by the Democratic administration of Barack Obama, output and employment have continued to fall. The gross domestic product is nearly 4% below what it was a year ago, while the industrial production has been cut by 13.6% over the same period. Official optimism that the economy is bottoming out, propagated by the Obama White House, points to the fact that in July, employers eliminated, quote, only, end quote, 250,000 jobs, somewhat less than the average job loss over the previous several months. By contrast, China's stimulus program centered on investment in infrastructure by state-owned enterprises and governmental bodies and expanded loans by state-controlled banks has effectively offset the massive decline in export earnings. The annual rate of growth of gross domestic product increased to 8% in the second quarter, up from 6% the previous quarter. Richard McGregor, a China watcher for the London Financial Times, 9 August 2009, commented, quote, Beijing has managed to pull the Chinese economy out of a ditch with a massive fiscal and monetary stimulus, end quote. Nevertheless, the global economic downturn has sharply worsened conditions for those migrant workers from the countryside who have toiled in factories owned by foreign and offshore Chinese capitalists producing light manufactures for export. Many have had to return to their family villages, at least temporarily, including Uyghurs from Xinjiang, impoverished Uyghurs, and also Han youth in the villages and cities of Xinjiang cannot now improve their conditions by securing employment in the capitalist-owned factories producing for export.